Welcome to Beat Diabetes Cereal Edition. Actually, Ben and I have done a video on some cereal possibilities in the past, but there's so many new ones springing up. I thought it might be good to just test myself after eating some of these and see if they live up to their hype. So on this edition, I'm going to test 4 different cereals. This one is called Catalina Crunch, and this one is Special K Zero Added Sugar. This one is called Keto Ratio Keto Friendly. And this one is called Magic Spoon. I've had a number of you ask me about the Magic Spoon and what I thought about that. Well, I hadn't tried it until recently. Actually, I started last night and I started with the Magic Spoon. I won't reveal what the numbers were until the end, but that was my beginning. I've got 3 more to eat. These products are popping up like popcorn these days on the grocery store shelves. When I first had to start looking for low-carb foods or making my own low-carb foods, it was at the very end of the Atkins craze. And there were still a lot of Atkins products, low-carb products around because of that. Manufacturers are not stupid. They will provide what the public wants. And if the public is uninterested in low-carb, they'll disappear from the shelves. And in those days, the public was still interested in low-carb due to Robert Atkins and his diet. But it was just a couple of years later when they just started to dissolve and disappear, and lo and behold, they were gone. There used to be low-carb muffin mixes. There were all kinds of low-carb bars. There were low-carb bagels, just a number of low-carb products. And lo and behold, within a very short time, poof, it's all gone, or mostly gone. The bars hung around, although there were less of them. And why was that? Because the public got interested in other things and Atkins wasn't so popular. And then when keto came along and began to build, guess what? The shelves are starting to fill with keto-type products. And now, just at Walmart, there were like 4 or 5, I think there was 5 different brands of low-carb keto cereals, and each brand often would have 2 or 3 or 4 different flavors within that brand. So there's lots of things to choose from. Now, why would people like cereal? Well, really 2 reasons. Number 1, it tastes good. And number 2, it's very convenient. It is so easy to pour some cereal in a bowl, put a little milk on it, and bam, there you go. So obviously, it is a popular thing. A lot of people say, well, when you go keto, you have to eat eggs and bacon every day, which is not true. There are other options. Enough about that. The question is, do these live up to their hype? They say they're low carb. You look at it and you think, man, this ought to be okay for my blood sugar. As I've said over and over again, the only way you can be sure is test yourself with a glucose meter in what is known as a postprandial test. Postprandial means post-meal. And what I encourage people to do is look for when you tend to peak. Now, that's going to differ with some foods. If I drank a soda, I'd probably peak in about 50 minutes, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. But on the other hand, if I ate pasta, spaghetti, it might be 2 hours before I peaked. So even with your foods, it's going to vary. But for most of us, we can get a pretty good idea within a certain time frame. When I was younger, my peak would usually be in about an hour, and it would start going right back down after that. My glucose would. Nowadays, it's more like an hour and 20. So that's what I've been setting as a peak, and that's where I'll test myself. When I say an hour and 20, what I mean is after the last bite of food, you just finished your food. Last bite, you set your timer for an hour, hour and 20, 2 hours maybe for some of you. And you're looking for when you're going to peak. It's going to take a few tests to figure out when you tend to peak. But for a lot of us, a good, safe, reasonable range would be an hour and a half. Might be less, might be more. So I'm going to, like I said, I already had the Magic Spoon. Today I'm going to, for this meal, and it's around lunchtime, I'm going to have the Catalina Crunch. Now, everybody pretty much recognizes you got to put milk on cereal. If you're one of those hardy souls that can put some cereal in your bowl and pour some water on it, well, good for you. But most of us are not that strong, and we need some kind of milk or milk substitute. Almond milk, unsweetened almond milk is a great choice. The other one, the one I almost always use, is heavy whipping cream, but not pure heavy whipping cream. I'm going to take this and pour about this much. And then I'm going to add, for every portion of cream, about 2 or a little over 2 portions of water. So we're going to mix this up. And this is going to taste actually better than milk in my estimation, but not have nearly the carbs that milk would have. All right, so the next thing is I want to try to make all these the same, so I'm going to use a 1-cup measure. I'm going to use 2 cups, so let's go ahead and pour in 2 cups of the cereal. Now this is 1 cup, and yeah, some smaller people could get away with 1 cup and feel happy and content, but as a full meal, this would not be enough for me. So let's go ahead and add the 2nd cup. Now this is going to be a true test of whether net carb effect has any reality, has any legitimacy, because these 56 grams of carbs should do a pretty good number on my blood sugar if you forget about the net carbs. And then on top of that, there's going to be a few carbs with the heavy whipping cream diluted by water. We will find out. I will have this as a meal, and then I'll have some coffee with it. I'll test myself an hour and 20 minutes later, and we will record it. And at the end, we will let you know how these different cereals work. Well, I have eaten a lot of cereal in the last couple of days, more than I would really care to. Once again, the 4 cereals I've eaten were Magic Spoon, Catalina Crunch, Special K No Sugar Added Cinnamon, and Ratio Keto. Let's take them one by one. With each cereal, I ate 2 cups worth, and this was my entire meal apart from a cup of coffee. My first meal was the Magic Spoon. This is advertised as a grain-free cereal, which is interesting. They listed 4 net grams of carbs, but the total carbs for the 2 cups I ate would be 28 grams. It is sweetened with allulose and monk fruit extract. Before my meal, my blood sugar was at 74 milligrams per deciliter, and 1 hour and 20 minutes after eating, my blood sugar was at 78. So essentially no spike at all, barely a glucose rise. Now, I know what you're wondering. How do you get your blood sugar in the 70s? Well, I normally do not have glucose levels that low, but this was the day after a 36-hour fast, and I'm sure that made a difference. I find that these kind of fasts reset my glucose levels lower than normal, and then they start to drift up day by day after that. But there was one more factor, and that is that I had the cereal at night, but around lunchtime I took a bitter melon tablet, and I find that this also lowers my glucose, albeit temporarily. So between the previous day's fasting and the bitter melon tablet at lunch, I was a bit artificially low. But the main thing to keep in mind is that there was no glucose spike at all, barely a rise with that Magic Spoon meal. It did live up to its hype. For my second cereal test, I ate Catalina Crunch, the dark chocolate version. This cereal proudly boasts of being keto-friendly. However, this was the highest amount of carbs of the 4 cereals. For my 2 cups, I was eating, can you guess, 56 grams of total carbs. But deducting the fiber, I was ingesting 20 grams of net carbs, which is still quite a few for someone who's trying to eat keto. This cereal reminded me of the old Chex cereal I used to eat when I was a teenager. Before my meal, my glucose read 92, and after the meal, it read 100, and that kind of surprised me. I figured that of all the cereals, this one would probably create the largest glucose rise, and 8 points didn't seem like much at all. However, I was surprised when I tested myself several hours after that test to get the pre-tests for my dinner cereal, and I found my glucose was at 119. My glucose had apparently had a slow rise that just did not stop, and here I was over 4 hours after my last meal, and it still had not returned to baseline. And I think this is a problem with some of the high-fiber keto products where they just create some kind of a super fiber so that they can deduct those and give you a low net carbs number. Sometimes that fiber does not harmlessly pass through our intestines without effect. Sometimes it just bides its time and slowly but methodically raises glucose even hours after we figured we should have peaked. I noticed this once when I ate 2 low-carb tortillas that had a lot of fiber. something like 4 hours after eating at a time I would expect my glucose to be in the normal range, I happened to test myself and my blood sugar was somewhere around 180. I was shocked. So here's a case where you cannot always test yourself at an hour or an hour and a half and get the whole story. With some of these unnaturally high-fiber keto foods, you may want to check your blood sugar 3 to 4 hours past your mealtime. Now, if you're wearing a CGM, no problem. Otherwise, you're just going to have to stick yourself. For my next 2 cereals, I deliberately tested my glucose not only at an hour and 20 minutes after eating, but also at 3 hours plus past my meal to see if they also had that same effect. Catalina Crunch was, for me, the worst cereal of the batch, however. The third cereal I ate was Special K sugar-free cinnamon. It boasts of being keto-friendly, and it lists 2 grams of net carbs per 1 cup of cereal, very low. So with my 2 cups of cereal, I would only be getting 4 grams of net carbs, but I would be eating 16 grams of total carbs, which is still significantly lower than almost any non-keto cereal you would find on your grocery store shelves. Before eating, my glucose was at 119 as a result of the lingering effects of that Catalina Crunch I had eaten for lunch. 1 hour and 20 minutes after eating, my glucose was at 99, a 20-point drop. Of course, part of this was because my glucose at the beginning of my meal was still recovering from that Catalina Crunch, and I probably had some extra insulin floating around in my blood. Still, the Special K did not have a piling on effect, so I could not complain. My body seemed to handle it well. I tested at 3 hours plus after eating that meal to see if this did the same thing to me as the Catalina Crunch, but it did not. At that 3-hour plus test, my glucose read 98. For my 4th test, I had a cereal called Ratio Keto. This also boasts of being, quote, keto-friendly, unquote, but it has 19 grams of total carbs per 1 cup. So for my 2 cups, I was eating 38 grams of total carbs, but only 18 grams of net carbs. Would the net carbs effect make a difference? Before the test, my blood sugar was at 92 milligrams per deciliter, and 1 hour and 20 minutes after eating, I had risen to 117, which wasn't terrible, but not exactly great either. When I tested my glucose at the 3 hours plus after eating, I was at baseline level and my meter read 93. So this cereal at least did not have that lingering effect that the Catalina Crunch had. I would say that the best cereals for my blood sugar were the Magic Spoon and the Special K no sugar added cereals. After that was the Ratio Keto cereal, and in last place was, you guessed it, that nasty Catalina Crunch. What are my conclusions? Well, first, any of these cereals would be kinder to your blood sugar than the typical cereals on the shelves where the manufacturers make no effort to lower net carbs, and that would include things like granola cereals that everybody assumes are healthy, and muesli cereals, same thing. These cereals are actually nightmares for diabetics, and they create huge glucose spikes. Don't be fooled by the word granola or muesli. Another conclusion I can make is that not everything that says it is keto-friendly is truly keto-friendly. 2 cups of the Catalina Crunch had 56 grams of total carbs, more than most candy bars, more than a medium potato, and more than a medium serving of McDonald's French fries. And if you had this meal 3 times a day, guess what? You'd be ingesting a whopping 168 total carbs. Granted, the net carbs effect normally should play a role, but there's just no need to tax your body with that many carbs, total, net, or otherwise. And it really bugs me that on the Catalina Crunch, they listed their nutrition info based on a 1/2 cup serving, something almost nobody would ever eat, such a small serving. Well, what about you? If you run these same tests, will you get similar results? Probably most of you will get higher numbers, but the only way you'll know what your body can tolerate is to do the test yourself and find out for yourself. Don't just say, well, this worked for Dennis or this didn't work for Dennis. Another point is this. In a way, their serving size, these little small serving sizes, well, that's probably the best way that most of us should try to eat these cereals. So I guess in a way, they're not totally wrong in suggesting tiny little 1-cup serving size or even a 1/2 cup. But you'll never get filled up by making a meal out of 1 cup of these cereals. And that means instead of making cereal your total meal, Maybe eat 1 cup of the cereal and then have a large slice of cheese with it, or a chaffle with some cream cheese on it. This would enable you to enjoy the taste of cereal without straining your metabolic system unduly. But I would not do this frequently, that is, have these cereals all the time. Usually we can get away with eating foods like these once or twice a week, but if we make them a daily habit, well, we may run into problems. These cereals, of course, are not a natural food. If you go to a wildlife reserve, you will never see boxes of cereal running around playing happily with the giraffes and the deer. And if you go into any farmer's field, you will never, I repeat, never find boxes of Magic Spoon or Catalina Crunch growing next to the wheat or the green peppers. They are, in fact, processed food, and generally speaking, it's better to lay low on the processed food and focus more on more natural foods. Although I would say this, natural or not, I would leave things like potatoes, rice, bread, and most fruits off my list, natural or not. The truth is, with all the carbohydrates those foods possess, I would much rather eat a big bowl of Magic Spoon cereal than them. It would be kinder and gentler on my blood sugar, regardless of what the well-meaning Whole Foods people suggest. So that's it for now. Hope this was helpful. If so, give it a thumbs up so YouTube will recognize the video's value and promote it to other diabetics desperately needing sound information. And consider subscribing so you're notified when we post new videos, which we try to do every Tuesday and Friday. God bless. See you again soon.